Hey folks, welcome to part 2 in the Code With Me tutorial series on our channel, where our goal is to code a working AI conversational partner together line by line. Prior to this video, the very first lesson was on the speech-to-text, where we put something together to capture the microphone input, then we sent it to Google Speech Recognition API to perform transcription. We also made it all run in the background. In this lesson, we're going to be tackling the text-to-speech module before we get into the large language model brain of the conversational partner. Towards the end, we'll also set up a conversation manager to act as the central server, loading the modules and passing information between them. For now, since there is no LLM, our goal is to have the text-to-speech repeat my microphone input. So let's have a look at what this program will do by the end of this video, if you follow along. So let's start running the program. Hello, hello, testing, testing.
Hello, hello, testing, testing.
At this point, you're going to simply repeat after me.
At this point, you're going to simply repeat after me.
Now, before we begin, let me reiterate the goals of this project. I want this project to be number 1, free, number 2, beginner friendly, even for non-coders, and number 3, hardware agnostic. So this should run with almost any kind of hardware that you've got. If you are a more experienced programmer, you may or may not get something out of this. In fact, you may disagree with me on some of my decisions. That's perfectly fine. I've made some sacrifices in certain places for the sake of simplification. So just know that this is the way I've chosen to do things in order to make things as beginner friendly as possible. And if you are a beginner and you come out of this having learned a little bit more programming, then I consider that a welcome bonus, and that makes this effort all the more worthwhile. Okay, now let's get started. First things first. We're going to use the same conda environment as the last tutorial series. So that is called, if you haven't activated your environment already, that's called tutorial in this case. And I'm going to install a few necessary packages. We're going to be using Microsoft Edge TTS for this tutorial, so let's install that package. It's called Edge_TTS, and also alongside PyDub and Pygame, which we're going to use for audio playback. In this case, I should have these packages installed already. So let's just create our file. Let's call this tts_edge.py. Okay, let's start with importing our packages. Let's start with the async IO for asynchronous programming. And we'll also do Edge TTS, which we just installed. And we're also going to need bytes IO for handling the audio data, as well as the PyDub module. And also, Pygame currently has some user deprecation warnings or user warnings regarding deprecation of a package in the future. So let's just ignore those warnings. This is just this is optional, of course. And Pygame also prints some stuff to the screen or to the terminal when you import the package. So let's just see if we can hide that just for convenience. After that, we can import Pygame. All right, so now the package that we're going to use is the Edge TTS module. So that's this right here. And you can see that there's a large list of voices that you can use. So in fact, you can go to our terminal, and if you just type Edge TTS, I think it's called list of voices, then you'd be able to find lots of voices in many different languages. So let's go with English, and let's choose a particular voice here. Let's say this one. So let's call this voice. I'll copy and paste that. Let's just determine what to do if this is the file that we're running. Let's just do nothing for now. And then let's create our class. This is the TTS module. So here, the first thing that we want to do is we want to initialize the Pygame mixer, and this is for audio playback. So we'll call this mixer init. And these parameters are going to be set by the output or the output format of the TTS, so you're not going to want to change this yourself. So just copy these parameters because they match the, for 096, because they'll match the edge TTS output. Okay, so we'll start an asynchronous function here, and it's taking some text. And let's start with some sound cue. Oops. And then we'll use a play sound function. We have a function within this function, which will find your channel from Pygame. And then we'll determine whether it's the first sound to be played. And then while true, we'll have a loop that awaits the sounds from the sound cue. Whoops. And we'll break out of this loop if the last sound is in the queue is none. However, if it's the first sound, then we're going to play back the sound on the playback channel. And then we'll also say that it's no longer the first sound. And if it's not the first sound, then we'll make sure that the playback channel is finished. We'll sleep for a very short period of time. And then if it's freed up, then we'll queue up the next sound. At that point, we will wait. We'll make sure that all the playback is finished at this point. And now we can start the playback task. From here, let's just print something to let us know what's going on. And I'll create the communicate object from the edge TTS. Using the voice that we set earlier, and you can always change the voice if you want. From here, let's create an audio buffer to collect the chunks that are coming out of the TTS. So if the chunk type is audio, then we will append this to the buffer. After that, if there's anything in the buffer, then we're going to join those audio bytes together. So let's say MP3 data. Create an audio segment to help decode this MP3 data. And we will make this a Pygame sound object. After that, we'll put in the sound cue. And I believe at the end of this, we will need to put none in the queue in order to tell the, oops, in order to tell the earlier loop that we'd finished here, and we'll await the playback task to finish that up. Okay, just having a quick look here. At this point, we should be able to test this out. So from here, we can create this TTS object. And let's put some text here. Let's say, hello, this is a text-to-speech conversion test using Edge TTS. And this is a second sentence. And then we'll run the TTS function. And then we'll also do another sentence here. This is a third sentence. Demonstrate the sequential TTS capability. Just to show that there's no overlapping sound or anything like that. We can run this as well. Okay, now make sure that your environment is activated, and we're going to try to run this now. Sorry, I forgot to save. Now we'll run it again.
Hello, this is a text-to-speech conversion test using Edge TTS. And this is a second sentence. This is a third sentence to demonstrate the sequential TTS capability.
Okay, now before we move on to the conversation manager, I want to make sure that we can chunk this text into sentences and be able to process each sentence individually. And that would be a version of chunking the text-to-speech, and that'll make the playback a lot faster, especially if your response from the LLM is quite long. So what we'll do for that is that there's a number of Sentenizer machine learning modules out there that it's easy enough to import and use. But what we'll try to do instead is, for the sake of simplicity and also for efficiency, we're going to use some algorithmic way to do this through logic instead. So I found this site from Stack Overflow. You can just copy this code. As you can see, you can split the entire text of Huckleberry Finn into sentences in about 100 milliseconds. And so you can copy this. And what we'll do is we'll just paste it right here. So that gives us this function. You can delete this if you want. This is the attribution. Okay, and now to start off with, let's say we will, from here, just take a look at these sentences. Split the text into sentences, and then let's just print something out just for ourselves. And then we'll create a loop for the playback. So right about here, we're going to say for sentences. Make sure we tab everything. This is just to check that it's not an empty string. And then we'll replace the text here with sentence. And so this is why for the example, I've chosen to use a response that is more than one sentence here. And so just a quick look through this, it should work. And so we'll test it out.
Hello, this is a text-to-speech conversion test using Edge TTS. This is a third sentence to demonstrate the sequential TTS capability.
Looks like there's a small mistake here, which is I just untab this part so that it doesn't terminate the response early. And let's try that again.
Hello, This is a text-to-speech conversion test using Edge TTS. And this is a second sentence. This is a third sentence to demonstrate the sequential TTS capability.
And now what we'll do is we'll start working on the conversation manager. As you can see, I've added a new workspace here. It's called YouTube tutorial. There's nothing in it at the moment, but what we'll do is we'll add a folder. We'll just call this modules, and then a new file, which we'll call main.py. And so within modules, we just copy in our TTS py that we've just made. We should also add a init file here so that we can import the modules from outside this directory. And we will also copy the background speech-to-text module that we created in the first lesson. So that's this one right here. So you see it's exactly the same as in the first lesson. And this again is exactly the same as in this current lesson. So let's start with the main.py file. Again, we'll import the modules. To import multiple, we just do that. Let's call this STT background and the TTS edge. And for asynchronous programming, we're going to use the async.io. Now, let's decide what to do if we run this file. We'll create a new class. Let's call this manager. So we'll initialize the recording object for the speech-to-text and transcription service. And then the text-to-speech, which we just created. After that, we will use a asynchronous method, which we'll call run. At this point, we can start the listening in background, which again is a method that we created in lesson 1, and then we'll have some conversation loop here. Say the text is from the text queue. That reminds me. So for the, I'll come back to it in a second. What we'll do next is we'll put the text inside the Edge TTS, so it'll speak the text back to us, whatever we put in through our microphone. And so if the queue is empty, do nothing. But if there is some other exception, and then we'll just have a short wait period here. Okay, now we'll initialize the manager, and then here we'll, first of all, we'll remind us to press Control C to stop, and then we'll run the program. And then we'll catch the keyboard interrupt here. We'll just say program interrupted. All right, now you notice that there's this text queue here, which is not originally part of the lesson. So what we need to do is, let's go back to our std background, which is part of the modules directory. And here we'll add a text queue. And of course, don't forget to import. And then in the callback function, we can print the transcriptions, sure, but then we will put, say, put no wait. the transcription into the queue. Okay, so back to the main. So this makes sense. And then we'll try to run this. So we'll go to the directory that we just created. You can see that there is just the main and the modules. If you look at the modules, it's just the two modules and the init file. So if we now run the main file. Hello, hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
Hello, hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
You should now just be repeating everything that I'm saying.
You should now just be repeating everything.
Okay, now congratulations if you followed along and made it this far. You now have a program that takes in your input through your microphone, transcribes it into text, and then says it out loud using Edge TTS. In a future tutorial, we're finally going to attach a large language model brain to this program so that you can speak to it in a conversational loop and it won't just repeat everything that you're saying. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.